Support Narativ's independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative and check out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe and download. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Narrative Live. It's good to be with you again. Hi, LB. How are you?
Hi.
It's good to see you again. We've been seeing a lot of each other lately.
I know. I just trying to get through this, so I'm happy to always be with you. Always spend time.
It's always good to be with you too. And the reason we're doing a lot of shows is because there's an election coming, which we feel is somewhat essential to the world, and we want to make sure that people don't forget exactly who we're dealing with this president. I keep sitting in the sunlight. Hopefully it'll disappear in a second. But tonight's show, we're going to go back to a place we were doing this incredible show with Bob Fitrakis and Steve Hoffenberg a few weeks ago. We ran out of time and we were both frustrated. So we thought, let's get Bob back in and spend some more time and hear more about Wexner and about Epstein. And we're thrilled that Bob agreed. So here's Bob Fitrakis back from Columbus, Ohio, and a legendary investigative journalist in Ohio, the man who covered Wexner more than anybody else and has been unafraid in revealing the details about him. Hi, Bob. How are you?
Doing well. And you?
I'm well, and I know LB's well. Were you surprised to see Wexner's name come up in court the other day with relationship to Ghislaine and Maxwell and the court case against her?
I didn't catch that. You were bouncing just a little. One more time.
Oh, were you surprised to hear Wexner's name come up in connection to the case against Ghislaine Maxwell in court the other day?
No, I don't know why anyone would be surprised. I mean, the great enabler of Jeffrey Epstein and, of course, Alan Dershowitz's involvement in the court case also, right? His defense is, that he knew Les Wexner and he's being blackmailed by anyone who accuses him of having any relationship. So I wasn't surprised. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein, who, when he first began, right, he said he only worked for millionaires.
Right.
But by the end, he said he only worked for billionaires. But the only billionaire ever associated with him that closely, and the only one he ever managed all his money, be it $4 to $6 billion, was Les Wexner. Mm. So we shouldn't be surprised at all.
Were you intrigued by Alan Dershowitz's defense, where he's suggesting that Virginia Giuffre was, I guess, blackmailing Wexner? Is that the situation that she stepped? I'm not sure I completely follow it, but that basically there's a blackmail scheme against Wexner.
Yeah, he used that as a defense, and he threatened it before down when accusations were made in Florida. Is that because he knows Wexner? And Wexner's opened, to blackmail. But there was long speculation that Jeffrey Epstein got his money by, in part, blackmailing Les Wexner. That
right.
he sort of dictated the terms.
You're cutting out a little bit there, so I'll wait for the signal to reestablish because it should come back, but you cut out there in the middle. There is, in fact, a lot of speculation that he did blackmail Wexner, and he blackmailed, allegedly, many other people. But what were you saying there about Wexner being blackmailed?
Well, when the state inspector general, before he was fired, David Sturtz, as well as the Franklin County Sheriff, Earl Smith, both of them believed that Jeffrey Epstein was blackmailing Les Wexner, mm-hmm. and that, had essentially secrets, that Wexner had eclectic sexual proclivities, and those secrets were held by Jeffrey Epstein.
Now, there's also a rumor, I guess, and I'll just jump into this because one of those things I wanted to talk to you about,
Oh,
that they were in fact lovers, and that maybe that was what he was blackmailing him on.
That had long been speculated on. If you go back to, the mid 1980s, Les Wexner was thought of in the old-fashioned term as a, quote, confirmed bachelor. And the business, too, if you read accounts of the business, his mom, Bella, was wandering around there at the Limited. His sister was working. But it's Epstein who booted the family out, with this recluse and very private man, Les Wexner, and brought in the models.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But, if he was in fact, if they were in a relationship, do you know if it was a relationship of convenience or a relationship that actually meant something to either of them?
Well, as the more you hear and read about Mr. Epstein, Jeffrey, it seems that, he liked underage girls, right? He liked, teens that were underage. So I would speculate that in his lust to service billionaires and billionaires only, he was willing to service, so to speak, a billionaire.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
oh.
LB, I'll throw it to you.
And
I think, to me, I just always come back to, his ties to intelligence operations, foreign intelligence, and
mm-hmm.
I think there's a very different philosophy, perhaps. If you read enough about it, you can kind of dig in there and get a sense that, if the body's required as a tool, and sex is just a tool to get you to advance your operation and whatever means you want to advance it, then you do it. And so I don't know which one of those might have been his, who knows? The man is in the dirt. But I don't know that it matters so much in terms of, anything to get the money, anything to run the operation, anything to do what they were doing. They would go to these lengths with their own bodies, with the bodies of other people, with the bodies of innocents. So I think it helps me to think of it more that way than to try to get into classifying somebody. I just don't think it's about sexuality as much as it is about exploitation.
Power and money.
Right, and power and influence, right?
Power and money.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more, right? It's, I think it was a way for him to gain some control and influence, over a billionaire. Mm-hmm. And, he did everything, including acting like a valet, mm-hmm. right? I mean, he was, again, described as, Les's, Gale Friday. He arranged stuff. He was a fixer, right? He warned people off. He scared people. He played the heavy. He brought in the dance troops and, cats to perform out there. Whatever you needed done, Jeffrey was your guy.
I didn't know he did cats.
Oh, I mean...
It's a very famous.
I think it didn't land, Bob. It hadn't landed in my brain quite right.
So it is a good anecdote because it does really tell you about their relationship.
Oh, maybe we lost you, Sam.
There I am. I'm here. Sorry. Well, I'm going to put one of us. Here we go. I'll put you back in here. We should be able to hear each other now. All of us can hear each other, even though you can only see two of us right now. I'll just walk you through what you're seeing on your screen here is, in the years between 1982 and 1987, he met a lot of very powerful people. Ghislaine Maxwell, of course, and Robert Maxwell in 1982. Adnan Khashoggi became part of his life in 1982. In 1987, what a year he had. Donald Trump, Steve Hoffenberg, Thomas Barak, and in 1986, he met Wexner. That's a very busy networking period for him when he was also overseas a lot of the time, working as an arms dealer for Sir Douglas Leese. But you could tell that he really was sort of infatuated with the idea of collecting these billionaires who then seem to have invested, at least some of them, their money with him.
No, absolutely. And Khashoggi, of course, ties to Iran-Contra, which Epstein clearly had, and then the alleged ties of Les Wexner himself. But a lot of strange stuff was happening in Ohio in that time period. For example, BCCI, right, the Bank of Crooks and Criminals International, ended up in East Liverpool investing in a incinerator, which later turned out to be linked to organized crime, allegedly through New Jersey Steel. So you had a variety of very strange events. And Wexner is coming out of nowhere. By 1989, there's a famous article in the Columbus Monthly that says the Titans, 6 men who rule Columbus. Prior to that, Wexner had been fairly low key. So this is the period he's getting close to, of course, Jeffrey Epstein and being more public. But I remember at the time thinking, okay, here's 6 guys. Not one of them lives in the city. If they rule Columbus, shouldn't they actually move into the city and run for election instead of building this little Stepford community known as New Albany for the ultra-rich?
Interesting. And they obviously didn't do that. So Epstein met Wexner in 1986, we believe, right? He was introduced by this guy named Meister, and they became very close very quickly. Not only did he take over Shapiro's apparent role of helping develop this New Albany project, but he also took on a very close relationship to Wexner, to the point where by 1991, he had this exclusive power of attorney over Wexner's life in that short period of time, in those 4 or 5 years. But he did also live in your part of the world. He lived in New Albany, right? It wasn't just that he was doing this by remote. He was there with Wexner a lot of the time.
No, absolutely. And he kind of moved up. If you follow the property trail, he has a nice house, and he ended up finally, by the early 90s, having the second most valuable house in Franklin County, which was the guest house with 30 acres of land. And it was thought to have been built for Jack Kessler, who is the co-developer in the beginning of New Albany with Les Wexner. But he sort of got pushed out because of scandal and crime related to the building of that community. And it was probably much better to have Jeffrey Epstein as your Gail Friday, errand boy, and fixer than it was, Jack Kessler.
Mm-hmm. New Albany is an interesting, as you mentioned, an enclave for the rich, and very, it's still very secluded. Why do you think they built it?
Well, there's a lot of speculation there, including allegations it was a way for Mr. Wexner to break away from the garment industry, get involved in real estate. Some speculate there may have been, there's been allegations of money launderer. He's also been a bit of a frustrated architect over the year. He's got a really good sense of architectural style. He's brought he brought the Wexner Center, the OSU, which, 6 months after it was finished, I thought they were still working on it. But a very interesting building. So that was some of the speculation. But one of the key things, really, it was built on $500 million in water and sewage subsidy from the people of Columbus, who are much poorer and darker and cannot really afford it.
So really, it was a way to swindle.
Very much, yeah. I mean, it feels very much like a city racket, right? Like this is how we can extract.
Sure.
Money from
Yeah.
the city. It's
absolutely.
Very mafia, right? And we know his deep connections and long history with not just the outfit, but the Genovese Pittsburgh. Is it Pittsburgh or Philly?
Pittsburgh, Genovese LaRocca crime family, yeah.
Yeah, LaRocca. That's right. The LaRocca crime family. So, this is what they do, guys.
This is how they do things. So,
this is how they do it.
And it's also how Max Fisher made his money, right? Les Wexner's mentor, and at Ohio State, the Max Fisher School of Business. But this is a guy who, got $100 million of riverfront property in Detroit for $1, and then got 50% 24-year tax abatements, and then took the UDAG money for mass transit instead of having mass transit going to the suburbs where the jobs were. It simply circles the downtown of Detroit. He took, millions of dollars in transportation money, and now you can live in Detroit at the Riverfront West luxury apartments built by Max Fisher and Tubman, go to the Renaissance Center, right, and work there, the headquarters, again, of General Motors, and then, go down to Greektown in the sporting arena, live in the city without ever setting foot in the city.
Interesting.
And that's, right, it's all public money, and that's what Wexner in part learned from Max Fisher.
And I think what Epstein may have learned from Wexner. So it seems to have been passed on.
They know how to fleece. Yeah. That's what they do. They fleece. They get the union contracts controlled under their Teamster organizations. Then they control the pension funds. And it's dominoes of rackets set up using infrastructure, using city relationships, development. It's very deep in there. And Epstein had more than Wexner. I mean, he had Leon Black. He had the finance guys, right? There are all these racketeers around him from another generation that were available to him to teach him their methods.
Yeah, Maxwell as well, Robert Maxwell too. I'm interested in
Robert
this.
Maxwell for
in La
international
Amity.
arms dealing. There you go.
So the house in Palm Beach called La Amity, the one he bought in 1985. It landed up being a very big. He wanted to build a Versailles-like complex out of it. Are you familiar with this? Wexner's planned estate, it said in, I think this is the New York Times, like a Trianon, if I'm saying correctly, at Versailles. This was the house that Wexner bought in 1985, and then I think there was a later tussle between Donald Trump and Epstein to buy it, much later on in like the 2000s.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, I mean, there was a variety.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bob. Sorry.
Yeah, no, there was a variety of those kind of assets, from the 727 Lolita Express, to hanging out at the Limitless yacht, described at one point as the largest yacht in the world. Also, I mean, the property in New Mexico, exactly what was his relationship with Governor Richards and other people involved there. And of course, the one, in New York that was written about by Architectural Digest, with its James Bond bathroom and interior, where it just sounds like everything was being taped inside. But these all seem to be strategically located, right? If you're running a honey trap and you're blackmailing people based on sex, And we know the CIA was involved with that, with the Covenant House in Central America, particularly when the new Cold War was going on in that region. They were using it a honey trap with underage teenage boys to blackmail diplomats.
Really?
Yeah, there was a very good book out. The Covenant House in New York, a branch was set up in Central America. There's a good book on it. It's like some of my stuff. It won an award you never heard of from people that take facts seriously. That was well known.
The houses that you mentioned in Palm Beach and in Manhattan, did he really buy it for $13 million and then give it to Epstein for $1?
Well, that's what the paper trail suggests. And, you've got Epstein running around talking about how much Wexner loved him. And you've got Wexner talking about what a genius Epstein is. And he sees these broad, parameters and sees the future. If you listen to Les Wexner talk about Epstein, it's like an Old Testament prophet. He's the guy that can see the shapes of things to come. Well, so to speak, because ultimately it would have ended with him impregnating lots and lots of underage girls to pass on his seed.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, and I know that sounds kind of rough maybe for listeners, the way that Bob just framed that, but those were the way these men, this is the way they spoke. And they would, Epstein would even bring in, academic minds and the scientists, and he would say stuff like that in front of them. And they were kind of like confused and, wow, this guy seems a little, a little strange. He's into the genetics and he's into his seed and he's into all this. So we're not trying to be salacious here. These are the words that this man and the people around him used. These were his beliefs. This is what he was on the record, or I don't know, on the record, but certainly there have plenty of witnesses that have sort of come forward and said, yeah, this is what he believed. This is how he spoke. This is what he was up to. So, and it was very long range. It wasn't like he suddenly fell into some weird cult himself. This was his man's modus operandi and his philosophy. And somehow he wooed people into thinking he was this great, brilliant scientific mind because he talked about, how he's going to populate the earth. And I have a hard time figuring out how I think wealth, when you put so much wealth in front of people, even academics, maybe especially them, and a lot of, gorgeous young girls running around, I'll give you a massage, right? I think it's like a mind warp for people, and they just elevated this man, Epstein, as some kind of thing that he wasn't, because they could see all these trappings. And it led them into a sort of sycophantic state. I do. I think it was very manipulative, very calculated. Ghislaine knew what she was doing.
They also constructed an image, right? I mean, they needed to construct this image for everyone to buy into it. So they needed the mystique. They needed the smarts. I read that in his office in Manhattan, and I want to talk a little bit more about that in a bit, but he only had 150 staff, but all of them administrative staff. There was no real finance people around him, no people who traded the markets or did any of the things you'd normally expect at a financial company like he had. And so it was all manufactured, a constructed event and persona for him to carry throughout his life. And yet it seems like Wexner fell for that or was in cahoots with that. Who knows? I mean, these are just some of the Wexner foundations. There are 6 foundations that he got complete control of. I presume these are pretty well-funded foundations, and he had the Harry and Hannah Wexner Trust, the Harry, Hannah, and David Wexner Trust, the Harry, Hannah, David, and Sarah Wexner Trust, the Wexner Children's Trust, the whatever that is, Wexner Foundation itself, and the Wexner Heritage Foundation. That's a lot of
it's
money.
A lot.
Presumably.
That's also
and none of those was where the real money was. The real money was at the Columbus Foundation.
You've said that to us before.
Yeah,
That does
he
not
bought.
come out very much.
They took over. No, they took over. I mean, there were hundreds of millions of dollars. The three major people that had donated were Wexner, Bella Wexner's mother, and Jeff Epstein. And when I was looking, there were just tens of millions. I remember at one point, $100 million in various stock. They needed it because it was an older foundation with a good reputation. Mm-hmm. And I primarily the Columbus Foundation. I primarily associate it with buying off all resistance in Central Ohio. I mean, there was just plenty of tens of thousands in grant if you kept your mouth shut and went on your way. I mean, it really took over the funding of all the upscale art in Central Ohio, which Sturtz was talking about. They needed the arts as portables. It was a way to transfer money. The Inspector General was looking heavily into that. And Taubman actually, remember, went to jail, went to prison. His good friend, Al Taubman, also a protege of Max Fisher, went to jail for fixing the art market there.
Interesting, because he has a phenomenal art collection. Like, I mean, it's exceptional what he has, and yet many believe there are money laundering vehicles in the art world, and high end art, the kind he has.
I think it's very established.
And particularly if you have private planes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. You can move it around. I think it's very well established. I know that the High Court in Britain, somebody came out recently. It was like, yeah, we think the Russians these oligarchs have been using art for money laundering. Like, it's like, oh, do you think so? Have you finally figured that out? Yeah. But really what that was making it official and putting it to paper, which was upsetting to the oligarchs that have had their financial talents into, I believe that was out of the UK, into the UK for quite a while.
Well, maybe I shouldn't even go there because it's so complicated. I was going to bring in another oligarch, but I think I'll just leave that for a second. There's a name that came up the other day. We were talking about Deutsche Bank, and the name Villard came up with the author of Dark Towers, who's a New York Times journalist who's done a phenomenal book looking into Deutsche Bank. And Villard was a name that came up, and because he was a turn of the century railroad tycoon, came from Germany, and he happened to build a place called Villard House, which is where he lived in Manhattan. Now, I was really surprised to realize that Epstein's offices were actually in Villard House, and that Steve Hoffenberg actually had offices right near there as well. And it was Hoffenberg who put Epstein in that house. I was, interested in the choice of real estate, but also Villard House backed onto, if I'm not mistaken, let me put it up here so you can take a closer look at it. Villard House also had the Helmsley Plaza Hotel attached to it. Now, the Helmsley Plaza Hotel comes up a lot because people like Robert Maxwell stayed there. I think people like Donald Trump stayed there. So it's a very well-known hotel and quite a landmark, and not one that you could miss. The Helmsley, of course, named after Leona Helmsley's family. She's the Queen of Mean, I guess they called her. Here's what the hotel looks like now, attached to the Villard House. But it's interesting in terms of New York real estate that Epstein lived in this, worked in this office that was named after Villard and was built by Villard. But also, the building itself was owned by the Sultan of Brunei, which ties again back into the Iran-Contra conversation we had earlier on. It's quite a combination of events and geography.
Well, he was right. The man who put the money in the wrong account wasn't that the Sultan at one point?
It was. It's what got Ollie North.
Who was Sultan of Brunei?
Right. It was. They were. This connects back into BCCI as well. I mean, it's all one big underworld convergence of fucketeers and gangsters, right? Arms dealers and gangsters. But what had happened, correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, because I'm doing this now without looking at anything for months and months, but all I know, they had sent like a confirmation of an account to somebody.
Right.
And it turned out it was the Sultan of Brunei's account, not whoever it was they were sending it to. And the people were like, "What is this?" And this looks like whose account is this? And Ollie North's like, I think it was him or his assistant. They're like, "Oh, we're so sorry. That was for this arms dealing we're doing over here with the Sultan of Brunei."
Actually, it was from the Sultan.
Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I think it came from the Sultan, and it ended up in a Swiss citizen's account who they later subpoenaed. And he didn't say anything. Somebody's stuffing millions of dollars into your private bank account in Switzerland, and you don't say anything to the bank.
It could be a mistake, right? Could be anything.
Would that be a nice mistake? But it shows you, for that particular long-term, CIA, Israeli intelligence, right? Iran, and then whatever was going on with the Contras in Nicaragua, and the drug deals and all that stuff. How big that web had gotten, that they were just losing track of accounts, and it was too much to even keep track of. So many people were in that pot, that Iran-Contra money pot. It was so much money. And so many players and everybody trying to do their thing. I mean, there was we talked about the cabbage and the cabbage launchers. And I think that airstrip, that Wexner and his airstrip played a big part in that as well. You had a great article. Did you do a book as well called Spook Air? I love that. But it was an article.
Spook Air was put in an anthology because they bought up the paper I wrote for and deleted all my articles. So the publisher had set up
I didn't know that.
Wexner did that?
The Columbus Dispatch, the Wolf family who were allies and protected Mr. Wexner, ended up buying the paper I wrote for and then deleted. I guess it's hard to have space on a hard drive. And they deleted all of this material. I also wrote stuff about them that they were connected to organized crime as well. So the two most prominent families in town, Wexner, had allegations of organized crime, as did the Wolf family.
Yeah,
and they bought up your paper, eh? That's one way to get you silenced. Have you had other experiences like that where you've been, where they've intimidated you for your reporting?
Oh yeah, it's sort of, I had the two where, the Jeff Epstein equals toe tag. Mm-hmm. And, where I told you about where they sent the courier down from New Albany, which made me laugh, right? It's like, it's sort of like, the Mano Blanco, the white hand that killed nuns and priests, right? It's like, hi, courier, New Albany. And, you were supposed to tremble at that. Next thing they're going to have people dressed up like the Cats troupe dancing in front of our storefront where we run the newspaper.
Right.
So, but now there was, when I was working with David Sturtz, the Inspector General, he was very concerned. So we used to talk on the phone what route I was taking to East Liverpool to look at the mob BCCI, Jackson Stevens, who funded, of course, Bill Clinton, to look at this incinerator. And then he would actually hand me on paper another route to take, because he was so convinced that I would never come back from East Liverpool, this kind of dogleg into Pennsylvania, just really kind of degraded, abused by people with money, Rivertown on the Ohio River, where they also had a little custom shop. So if you wanted to run, guns, drugs, whatever it was a good place to go to get your custom sealed goods.
Wow, that's
approved.
fascinating. I want to pull up this picture again that we had of all these guys involved in different ways. Some of them in Iran-Contra. So we see Ghislaine Maxwell. Now, she wasn't directly involved, but Robert Maxwell was obviously involved in Iran-Contra, a big piece of that. Some people speculate that Jeffrey Epstein may have actually inherited a lot of that money as part of a arrangement with Ghislaine and Robert Maxwell, that he wasn't really destitute when he died, and that money somehow landed up being part of his fortune. We know that Adnan
and there's witness testimony. There's witness testimony to that as well in his case.
Correct. Yes, there is. A maid, right? Yeah, I thought it was a maid,
bookkeeper. A bookkeeper.
And then Adnan Khashoggi, we definitely know was involved in that, and he was a definite client of Epstein's. We just mentioned the Sultan of Brunei was the owner of the offices of the building in which Epstein had his offices. Thomas Barak, now, I don't know if he's directly involved with Iran-Contra, but he certainly is directly involved with the Saudis. Because he's basically their front man in the US. And Hoffenberg ran Towers Financial, where, we've said on this show before, there's good enough, let me say, a fact pattern to suggest that Towers may have been a vehicle for laundering some of this money from Iran-Contra through. And so the odd man out there is Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump actually is connected in an ancillary way to both Adnan Khashoggi and the Sultan of Brunei, because they were involved in trying to move Adnan's yacht off his books for a period of time there. So all these people, maybe not Wexner directly, I'll leave him off the books here because I don't really know whether he's directly involved, but all these others seem to have some form of connection to Iran-Contra.
I mean, arms dealing is it's a profitable business. I mean, it's a huge amount of money. You get to, I don't think you're paying taxes on a lot of that money. There's dirty banks that you get to be involved in. You get leverage and real traction into nation states. You're working with their intelligence agencies, usually, if you're involved in these arms deals.
And you mentioned there's a BCCI connection to Liverpool as well?
Yeah, they were. It turns out, and not only that, Von Roll, which traded the super gun for Saddam Hussein, was also an investor and bribing the governor's brother. There was a long network with George Herbert Walker Bush in Ohio. In fact, you may know this. Samuel Prescott Bush is buried here in Green Lawn Cemetery. And if I walked down the street 2 blocks, I would see their Episcopal church. Their son Prescott Bush got run out of town for writing a prank letter where he said that he had saved General Pershing by knocking down a shell with a bolo knife. And his mother had it printed. But again, he was a good friend of George Herbert Walker. That was his father-in-law. So also well documented, they funded a little party called the Nazis as stormtroopers through the Union Banking Corp. The Bushes had a long...
Is Union Banking
the Bushes had a long...
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm getting a little bounce here. Go ahead. I think I can hear you now.
No, I was just wondering if Union Banking was also in Ohio, or whether that's just related to the Bushes, but not in Ohio.
The Union Banking Corp. No, but here I found out how they got. I have a picture in the other room. Samuel Prescott Bush, who became rich in Columbus. There was a man, brother of John D. Rockefeller, Frank Rockefeller, who put him in charge of Buckeye Steel Castings, where he was put on the armaments board in World War I and gave himself a huge unbid contract, and also a contract to Percy Rockefeller, who had the foresight to buy up Remington Arms just prior to the U.S. getting into the war. So here's another coincidence for you. Richard Secord, Columbus, Ohio, and of course, when I was looking at Spook Air, Southern Air Transport, it was because somebody had tipped me that Felix Rodriguez of the legendary shooter team that had done in Che Guevara involved and screwed over by Ollie North in the Iran-Contra. The true believer was in town. So I got a call from some people from Rickenbacker Air Base saying, look out, Felix Rodriguez is in town, the man who's supposed to have the watch of Che Guevara.
Oh, wow. Interesting. So it's all the same characters that keep popping up over and over again. I love this picture of Wexner. I think this was from a newspaper article back then. There's this image of pharaohs, or at least an Egyptian head above his head there, and I guess this is either look at the photograph that's been turned into a drawing, or it's a drawing. I'm not sure, but he's got his hands, waving in the air. He seems like a pretty creative guy. But the interesting thing they say there about him was that Les is totally married to the business. He's never been married. He has never had the time, and this was pretty late in his career. But he did eventually get married. He ended up getting married to Abigail. And they're still married today, despite whatever relationship he might have had with Jeffrey. And it says here in the New York Times wedding announcement of them, and I might have to pull it up here to read it effectively, but this sounds like it was, I don't want to say an arranged marriage, but perhaps a marriage that was necessary because of his age and because he was a bachelor for so long. And one of the interesting things is that she had a history. Her father, I think, was I got to pull up the right quote here. I don't want to misrepresent it, but he worked as at the first office that El Al had in New York. So he had ties to Israel as well, which I know is a big part of Wexner's life. Any thoughts about Abigail and Leslie and their relationship?
Well, the notion is, again, Al Tubman was encouraging Les to get married. Jeffrey supposedly was on the other side of the issue, thought it was a bad idea. Les was having so much fun. There were models everywhere. He was not the secretive recluse, rumored to be a heavy partier. They had moved out to New Albany and in a sense abandoned the Jewish enclave of Bexley over here on the east side. So it was Tubman who said it's not too late to get married. And he ended up with 4 children, and a lot of it, all sorts of speculation on the prenuptials, and in terms of control of his wealth and the arrangement, how all that was bartered and negotiated.
It's interesting as well. I don't know if you're going to jump in there, Albie, but let me just do this quickly. This is Maria Farmer on the left-hand side, who was said to be, is a victim of Jeffrey Epstein, but is also said to have been held captive at Jeffrey Epstein's house in New Albany, which was right alongside the Wexner household. And she says that she was only allowed to leave when Abigail Wexner said it was okay for her to leave. And that is Abigail and Leslie Wexner as they are now. They still have a very successful long marriage. Do you know much about Maria Farmer's involvement and Abigail and Leslie's involvement in the human trafficking part of Jeffrey Epstein's world?
No, that's the big question. Other than the obvious, he claims he didn't know about Maria Farmer. I find it impossible to believe. He knows everything that happens Leslie Wexner said that he wasn't really aware of this incident, but he knows everything that goes on in New Albany. I've told you I got to meet 5 New Albany cops when I drove by the place. They claimed 2 bridges that didn't even look like bridges. They looked like ditches were out and the roads were closed. And, when I was down there, very quickly they had 2 detectives, plainclothes, 2 people in a cruiser, officers in uniform, and another one in uniform in an SUV. So, when Mr. Wexner knows what happened in New Albany, so I can't believe for a minute, and it's documented that, she made calls, and that Abigail knew. So I can't believe Abigail wouldn't have told. Again, Les, because to a large extent, it was thought she was the force that kind of encouraged and drove Epstein away from the compound out in New Albany. Yeah, by 99, they've terminated the durable power of attorney, but it's really thought to be, her influence.
So Abigail was sort of playing another level of armed guard on the roof around her man there. We see this.
Yeah, well, I think after the Maria Farmer incident, she realized, these people, no one's got more buildings named after them in Columbus, and I doubt very few people in America have more buildings with their family name on it than Les Wexner. And Abigail did her own thing with, raising money with show horses and dressage, etc., and had their own little world carved up, highly, highly respected. All that began to, disappear because of Epstein, who was loathed and hated by the wealthy, arty, philanthropic class in Columbus, thought to be, just a complete ass, and this. This evil kind of intimidating force.
A lot of people said that about him.
Yeah,
a lot of people said that.
They did, that he was a thug, that he was just this Coney Island thug. For whatever it was, nothing got refined about him and how he dealt with people. So you just,
it is what it is.
It is what it is. It is what it is.
See, here's him.
He terrified people with a lot of money. I interviewed these people. I actually worked for one of them, one of the daughters of very wealthy Crane family, who hung out in those circles. My editor, who knew the woman that was thought to be the escort. Well, she was the escort, but some thought front for Les Wexner. But both of them, terrified of Epstein, just thought he was creepy, evil, nasty, and people were afraid of them. But these were people with money, and more than one wealthy person, at least two, including one that worked for the Limited, spent a lot of money having him investigated. And, and in one case said, look, do not write about this guy. This guy is evil.
Wow. Well, he
really?
sure was.
One of them was high up at the Limited, although he's still an anonymous source.
All right. Okay, that's interesting.
So he said to you, don't write about him. I've investigated him, and he's too dangerous for you to write about.
Yeah, and he showed me some of the, yes.
What did he show?
Yeah, in fact, it was very specific. He says, usually I'm not scared, when I have investigations of people. In this case, this guy scares me, and he should scare you.
Wow, that's chilling. Now we know as well that he had close relationships, at least with Ehud Barak, the former prime minister of Israel, probably through his work as a military intelligence asset for Israel. But some of this ties into Wexner, and it's really interesting because Barak met Epstein ostensibly in 2002, where Shimon Peres introduces them. In 2004, just 2 years later, Wexner Foundation gives Barak $2.3 million for research that no one really knows what that was for. And we suspect that came directly from Epstein because he was running the foundation, but no idea, no clue what that was about. And then 10 years later, they're still friends. They form a company together, Epstein and Barak. They form a company called Sum. And then that Sum becomes a big investor in a company called Carbon, which is an Israeli startup, which many people fear is the big brother of of our age. It was sort of the Uber surveillance app of our times. And so it feels a lot like an Israeli military front, Israeli military intelligence front. I mean, I get that Wexner was very pro-Israel, but would he have been involved in all of these kinds of intelligence fronts and these intelligence exercises like Carbon? I mean, that seems like it's very, very involved in something pretty deep.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like Wexner. Wexner had what were thought to be, alleged to be old organized crime, what was known as the syndicate. He was part of the 60th anniversary official delegation from the U.S. At one time, he was referred to as the largest private donor to Israel in terms of private foundation money. And he also, was the protege of Max Fisher, who again, in the Ford administration, it's been written, it's on the record, not disputed, who did backdoor diplomacy involving Israel and other countries in the Middle East. And also remember that Max Fisher ended up with 3% of United Fruit. Again, and he was thought, alleged to be a legendary bootlegger. My uncle George Hersulis used to tell me he worked for Max Fisher, right? He was smart enough to set up in Ontario, across the border, a refinery for what later became part of Marathon Oil. So he bought oil and gas, but he was bringing in, the best booze Canadian club from the Brofmans.
That's
and
right.
He ended up on the board of United Fruit with 3% of it. And that came out, that's one of the things that was being looked at by David Sturtz, the Inspector General, who was also looking at Chiquita Bananas, which got busted for bringing drugs up from Central America in their banana crates and fruit crates,
the crates.
among other things. Yeah. And the Cincinnati Enquirer actually wrote about it, but since their reporter had actually plugged into, without permission, their phone system, they had to retract the story.
Oh.
But the facts were never in dispute.
But
annoying. This was all part of the network. The very famous story. I'm sure you on Google you can probably still find the original story. But all of those were kind of friends of Wexner, the old mob connections coming out of Cleveland, which the Joint Teamster Consul in Youngstown. And for full disclosure, my dad was a Teamster union steward. So my brother used to work for 337 Hoffa's old logo. And I spent one summer, they saved me a spot on the truck. So, you're absolutely right. The way you make money, I've seen it my whole life. So, again, so it allowed me to figure it out really easily.
How do you...
so much makes sense, Bob, now that I know this about you. You have a feel. I mean, because there's an energy to the world, and if you're that close to sort of passing through it. I know that sounds surreal to people, but I'm very serious about this. You can feel it, you can see, you can study a man like Wexner and go, oh, I know what this is. This is real familiar.
You start seeing the patterns.
Because the story makes no sense, right? He refers to himself as a lunky donkey. He's got this it's the perfect Horatio Algiers entrepreneur. And absolutely, what about the price? I mean, there were studies saying, how can he make these profits by selling this many dresses? It just doesn't really make sense. There's got to be, like Donald Trump, some other source of money and income.
Right.
Going on.
Whatever happened to Sturtz's files? Or you mentioned the sheriff. Was it a local sheriff that had some files in the shed?
Yeah, the Sturtz's, I mean, we were getting reports from some of his old staffers. The governor, George Voinovich, whose brother Paul Voinovich had ties to organized crime and actually was taking bribes, reportedly from Von Roll, to build this incinerator where you could just burn anything. EPA permits didn't matter. So, you know, when Sturtz wouldn't back off from Wexner and made it real clear he was fired. I mean, just he openly fired. But the other guy was kind of a corrupt Sheriff Earl Smith in Franklin County, and he was running for the last time in '92, and he had sold badges. Right, if you could get you could be an honorary deputy sheriff with a real badge.
They do this
for $500. You know.
Hey, why not?
Yeah, that's what Arizona they did. Maricopa County. Yeah, they do this.
But the files, are there files
the
anywhere? Sorry, I'm interrupting you. Sorry.
Well, when he left, they said the place was cleaned out, but he lived down in Grove City. And I would see him, you know, he really liked me. And I would say, like, you know, you're corrupt. And he'd say, I'm the least corrupt. Why don't you come out and have lunch with me? And I'll show you what's real. So I took him up on it. I began to do it regularly. His wife would make his sandwich and soup. And we'd head out to this old shed. And
well, Bob,
he had these files on organized crime.
You're a real inspiration to us because you know you've been a unbelievably dogged journalist on this, and have not stopped, and you've really kept what do you call a portal into this world that we would not have otherwise had if it weren't for your incredible work over these last decades in exposing Wexner and keeping tabs of all of this. Your work is really foundational to a lot of the work we're doing, and it's fantastic that you've kept such a meticulous record, and your memory's so good, and you tell good stories. That's for sure.
Oh, so great.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate. And look, you're one of the few people in the country that'll actually have me on. Everyone interviews me. Virtually nobody gives me any airtime.
Well, you know, because
I mean, well, we love unpacking the underworld, right?
Yeah.
I think it's very important. I don't think there's anything more important right now, in terms of America sort of grasping and sort of losing its naivete and grasping what we're in the grip of right now, than folks that have done deep research, great investigative journalism, and whistleblowers that can hopefully start coming out and start talking about this, of what this underworld of organized crime and intelligence really is. And we'll have to bring you back on, and we'll have to talk about, you know, why Wexner, why Israel, why organized crime, and what that intersection really is, how Jeffrey Epstein really fits into that. And what it exposes, that it has been going on in our nation and around the world for quite a long time. We have to wake up to this. People need to wake up to this. It's not conspiratorial. It's just this whole other realm that we don't know about unless folks like you go and do deep work and sort of say, oh, look, here's some arms trafficking. What's this connected to? Oh, here's some nation state, you know, moving some stuff around, and here are some gangsters that are in that. We do get infiltrated through our underworld. We do. That's where we're vulnerable. We're vulnerable through our own crime syndicates. And we've got to learn about them. People need to learn about them and learn what else comes up into America through those crime syndicates. Because it's nothing but evil.
In fact, in just an hour, in under an hour, I think Barack Obama is going to be talking about the threat to democracy right now at the Democratic National Convention. And it's a very serious speech. If you haven't had a chance to read it yet, I urge you to take a look at it and to watch him tonight. But, you know, he is the guy who, with Bob Mueller, ultimately identified this threat, this transnational crime threat, as a threat that it is. Now, of course, it's swamped us now. But this is what we're fighting. We're fighting a massive organized crime world that is intertwined with intelligence agencies and some of our own, and it's a hell of a thing to beat back. Your work has been important to helping us understand it, because you've had such a close-up view of what it looked like in Ohio. But as we pull out, as we pan out, we realize there's so much more of it, and it all looks pretty much the same. And right now, it's threatening our very existence as a republic and as a free democracy. So I'm going to be watching that speech. I'm looking forward to it. I hope everyone else does. Obama does good speeches. I've even got my doll from the 2008. There it is, 2008 convention.
Oh, I've got my Kamala.
I had John McCain one, but this is just my. I'm only left with the Obama one.
That's
I don't
your
have McCain. There you go.
This is
Well,
just
in 19. All right.
Kamala.
Who's that?
That's Kamala Harris as Wonder Woman.
No, I'm calling her Kamala.
Kamala.
I'm calling her Kamala.
Kamala, I wish you all the best.
I collect political figures. My PhD's in political science, so I'm a big fan. In 1992, I was actually Governor Jerry Brown, one of his platform spokesperson. So, in fact, that's how I learned some of this stuff about BCCI. Bill Clinton said he was going to close it down. So I sent out a letter to every green and brown person in the state of Ohio, Governor Brown. I was running against John Kasich for Congress at the time.
Really?
And then once they got in, Jackson T. Stevens, who had bailed Clinton out with a loan, turned out to be one of the investors. So these promises made in Ohio suddenly disappeared. And I was thinking,
where are they leaning now? Where's Ohio leaning now? It seems to be a lean
it's
Democrat.
4 points. 4 points up for Biden. But the key thing is remember that the mail-in voting, they're going to send something out where you can apply. So if they make the voting difficult, Trump can only win that way, and that's what they're doing. Right? Our Secretary of State, Frank LaRose, just said there can only be one drop-off box per county because of security and money, because of the cost of cameras. So in places like California and the West Coast, there's tons of drop-off boxes, but we can only have one per county, and that's the only place we voted in the primary was at a board of election. Ours in an old abandoned Kohl's store at the edge of the county.
That is horrible. That's happening everywhere, that they're doing everything they can to suppress the votes, even though they're saying that they're not going to be doing it. So we'll keep watching that. But we better go because we're running out of time. And it's
all right.
And it is time for us to get to watch the DNC tonight. Thanks, Bob. Thanks always for joining us.
All right.
Appreciate
you. Enjoyed
insights.
it.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank
Have
you.
a good night.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
You too. Bye.
Support Narrative's independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative and check out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe and download.